If you've been watching this channel for any extended period of time, you know how big of a fan I am of the McVenture series, specifically Shadowgate. If you're unfamiliar with McVenture, long story short, it's a series of point-and-click adventure games from ICOM Simulations that came out on various computer platforms in the 80s and were later ported to the NES. I've done videos on each of the NES ports, and you may want to check those out first if you haven't already before watching this episode. Shadowgate was definitely my favorite of the bunch, although they were all really fun in their own right. And this remake came out in 2014, so I guess it's been out long enough for me to finally get around to checking it out. So yeah, in 2012 a group called Zojoy launched a Kickstarter campaign and raised enough money to do a modernized remake of Shadowgate. Dave Marsh and Carl Roloffs, two of the game's original programmers, were in the original promo video for the project, which showed off concept footage for their new version of the game. The campaign met its goal, and in 2014 Zojoy launched the Shadowgate Remake. But this isn't just the original game with a modern facelift, this is Shadowgate reimagined, with new puzzles and soundtracks while still taking place in that very familiar looking old castle. For McVenture fans and fans of point-and-click adventure, I have to say this is definitely worthy of the name Shadowgate. Okay, so the game starts you off in front of that old castle just like in the original game, and right away you'll notice a lot of familiar looking environments. But now the areas actually seem to come alive with cascading waterfalls and roaring fires in the background. It's an all new look and feel to the original game with more of a dark gothic slant to the art design.
Blackmere was a fool to send a child to do that which even the vaunted Circle of 12 could not. Contain my growing power. Come if you wish, it makes little difference. Seal your fate within this living castle of the dead.
As a fan of the original game, it was really exciting to see modern takes on some of the old stomping grounds, and I felt right at home. However, it's just different enough to be its own thing. There's new puzzles and new areas to explore, or they've changed some things around just enough to where there's something new, even for fans who've played through the original a dozen times. Now, one of the most important things about any adventure game is the interface, so let's take a moment and talk about that. First of all, they were nice enough to throw in an automap feature. Back in my day we had that, it was called a notepad. Also, there's this skull called Yorick who sits up in the corner and occasionally gives you hints or taunts you without mercy. They also swapped out the familiar looking text commands at the bottom of the screen for an icon system that's functional enough once you get used to what all the commands mean. However, if you're an old fuddy-duddy like me, they give you some options and you can just bring back the original text commands, which will sit permanently at the top of the screen. In fact, they give you a number of options to make it feel more at home, including even bringing back the original 8-bit transitions between rooms just like in the NES version. I felt like this was the optimal setup for me. The original text commands, the 8-bit transitions, and they even forked out the licensing fees to reuse Hiroyuki Masuno's epic NES musical score. Okay, I have to talk about this for a second. They completely redid the musical score for this game, and it's really well done. This soundtrack could easily hold its own with any big-budget AAA title. It sounds like Shadowgate meets Skyrim. Just listen. However, and I almost feel bad about this, but I ended up switching it over to the old 8-bit chiptunes from the NES version. As much as I like the modernized takes, I just felt more at home with the original score. Occasionally I'd flip back and forth between the two just to hear the modern version, but then I'd end up flipping back. This game is lots of fun to play through, and the remix of old puzzles makes it fun for even seasoned adventure game fans. You've got multiple difficulty levels to choose from, and there are plenty of clever and macabre ways to die, just like any good adventure game. There's also some modernized touches. Even if you're using the original NES score, you can still hear some new sound effects in the background that really make the old castle come alive. They even added an interesting feature to the torch mechanic. So in the old game, the torch system acted like something of a timer. You'd have to keep finding new torches throughout your quest and keep at least one lit so as to not lose your way and die in the pitch black darkness. Well, they brought that back, but now when your torch gets dimmer, so too does the light in the room, making it harder to see before you end up having to light a new torch. It's just a nice touch to add to the nuance of the game. Remember, this was technically supposed to be a horror adventure game. Also, I mentioned before the gothic art design, and that's probably my only major complaint. Sometimes it's just tough to see objects in the room that you can actually interact with. It's hard to tell what's a real object and what's just part of the static background. Also, I wish they would have made the text box just a little bit bigger. I feel like I'm having to scroll through it more than I should be. And it'd be nice if you could rearrange items in your inventory instead of them just being sorted by when you acquired them. Like any adventure game, you'll end up with a lot of junk and it can get pretty messy in there. These are all minor complaints though. Seriously, the Shadowgate remake is absolutely worth your time if you're a fan of the McVenture series or adventure games in general. There's just enough new stuff to keep even the most hardcore of Shadowgate fans guessing, and the multiple difficulty levels make this accessible for everybody. You can find the Shadowgate remake on just about any platform these days, and it's pretty cheap, so there's no reason not to try it for yourself if you're a fan of the genre. Well, what did you think of this one? Were you a fan of McVenture games? If you were a fan of the original Shadowgate, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you had a chance to play through the remake. What are some other adventure titles you'd like to see covered here on the channel down the road? As always, thank you for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.